I won't go into the extensive history of trade knives in North America, but you can't really tell the story of the Green River knife without discussing trade knives to some extent. Trade knives were just basically crudely manufactured knives used as bartering tools to trade with Native Americans. In the 1700s, the French would trade knives to Native Americans in exchange for furs and favors. And by favors, I mean that the French would pay the natives to attack the English. English companies would usually offer trade knives in exchange for furs and pemmican. By 1830, the knife making guild of Sheffield, England, had basically cornered the market on frontier knives in North America, but that was until in the late 1830s when John Russell challenged Sheffield's dominance in the American market and gave rise to the Green River knife. John Russell got into the cutlery business in 1833, and in 1836, he constructed a water powered knife factory on the Green River in Massachusetts. After, a setback from a fire and a flood, Russell got things sorted out and production ramped up. John Russell started producing axes and chisels at first, which were of notably high quality. But by 1837, he was producing butcher knives and utility knives, and these were stamped Green River Works on them. And these were initially the type of knife that hit the public. It wasn't, typically what you think of a Green River Hunter or Skinner. It was more like a classic long butcher knife like this. And that was actually the first batch of knives that went west, looked exactly like this. His Green River knives were hand forged and made to high quality standards. And finally, when his classic hunter design came out and went west, that got extremely popular. But Russell also paid extremely high wages at the factory in an attempt to attract experienced and skilled craftsmen from as far away as England. The strategy did work though, and not only did Russell make high quality knives and products, but they also built a highly efficient system of manufacturing. The Green River Works was blanking out blades and stamping out rivet holes. And this manufacturing efficiency allowed Russell to compete with the Sheffield knife makers. Even when Sheffield resorted to predatory pricing tactics to drive Russell out of business, they were able to stay competitive. By 1840, buffalo hunters were bringing Green River knives with them as they made their way to the western frontier. And the knives quickly gained a reputation for high quality. And after this, demand for Green River knives grew rapidly in all the towns and trading posts out west. In addition to good quality, frontiersmen appreciated that the knives were of American origin rather than English. Undoubtedly, many frontiersmen also thought the knives were named after the Green River that ran through Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah, and that kind of reinforced their attraction to the brand. Because mountain men, traders, cowboys, gold prospectors, hunters, and settlers preferred the Green River brand, Native Americans did as well, and they quickly became a very valuable trade commodity. So much so that Green River knife blanks were shipped out west by the barrel load. Contrary to popular belief, in the early days, Green River knives were actually at the tail end of the mountain man era. The last rendezvous happened in 1838, and the Green River knives just weren't prolific out west yet. During the 1840s, much of the fur trade was dominated by Native Americans who, after the winter was over, would take their hides and buffalo robes to a local trading post, which was usually stocked with Green River knives. The chief would strike a deal for payment with the trading post manager. Then the families would exchange their furs for the goods that were agreed upon between the chief and the trading post. Most trades involved knife blanks, rope tobacco, and glass beads like these, which were extremely valuable to Native Americans of the day. And these are actually real, authentic, period correct trade beads right here. There were four Green River knife designs that were popular on the American frontier. You had the original Hunter, you had the Skinner, also known as the Buffalo Skinner, the Butcher knife, and what became known as the Dadley knife. The Hunter was the original knife that really set things off on the Western frontier and brought the company to fame. But the Skinner and Butcher eventually became equally popular when they were released. The Dadley knife was a design by John Dadley, whom Russell hired from England. And the Dadley knife is a remake of an old Sheffield design. And the reason for this grooved spine right here is kind of lost in history, and it's one of the mysteries of the Green River knives. Many believe that it was just jimping, like on a lot of modern knives. Uh, Many believe it was used for scraping hides, and some of you think because this is a spear point blade and it's symmetrical, the jimping or whatever it is right here was so you can index the knife correctly, so you didn't put your hand on the sharpened blade. But that's one of the mysteries of the Green River knife is the serrated backbone. And before you say it's a saw, this can't be used as a saw. It won't cut anything. So that's the Dadley's kind of an enigma in knife design. But if you notice from these knife designs, they were in fact designs that existed before Green River used them. But the Green River knives themselves were kind of inspiration for future famous knives, like this became the Nessmuk knife, and this obviously was where Horace Kephart got the idea for his Kephart knife. And although Green River Works did sell some fancy sheaths for their knives, they were seldom purchased, and they were almost never shipped out west with the kegs full of knives to be used as trade knives. Most of the mountain men and frontiersmen just made a sheath like this by sewing together a couple of pieces of leather to make it. The Native Americans, on the other hand, they didn't want the white man's sheath. They liked making their own, and they made some very ornate and beautiful sheaths for their Green River knives. In just a 20-year span between 1840 and 1860, 720,000 Green River knives were shipped out west. It became more than a knife. It was a Western icon, and the phrase done up to the Green River was commonly used to refer to something that was done right. When somebody says it was done up to the Green River, it means that it was done to the fullest extent possible. Also, phrases like give it to them up to the Green River meant stabbing someone with your knife all the way up to the Green River trademark stamp on the blade, which shows that the Green River knife was used for more than just skinning and butchering animals. From 1940 through the Gold Rush, through the Great Bison Slaughter, the Indian Wars, and the Civil War, Green River knives were found almost anywhere there was people. The Green River knife was the last great product of the American Industrial Revolution. Around 1850 or so, Sheffield knife makers in England and knife makers in Solingen, Germany, started making exact copies of Russell Green River knives and even stamped them with the words Green River on it to fool consumers. With America devastated by the aftermath of the Civil War, the gold fields drying up out west, the destruction of the great bison herds, and the rise of city life, demand for a frontier knife like the Green River knife was slowly fading. Settlers had basically already settled and were working cattle or planting crops, instead of trapping, fur trading, hunting bison, or fighting Indians. During this period, Green River knives became cowboy, ranch, farm, and kitchen knives, and at this they actually excelled. Competition was just fierce in the cutlery market, and labor disputes were rampant. In 1870, the factory was moved to Turner Falls and utilized more modern manufacturing techniques in order to reduce cost and increase volume. Russell realized that the days of the frontiersmen were waning, so they diversified into other aspects of cutlery, from eating utensils to work knives, even fancy bowie knives, and folding pocket knives like the Barlow. But the traditional Green River knife never really went away. The Great Depression was extremely hard on the cutlery business. After banks collapsed in 1933, Russell ended up selling the company and merging with Harrington Cutlery Company, which was one of their main competitors. So after 100 years of business, the company merged with its competitor and became the Russell Harrington Cutlery Company. Like the Sheffield and Soligen knife guilds copied the Green River knives before the Civil War, new copies of the Green River knife became prolific in America, particularly the old hickory knives made by Ontario Cutlery. And, even the Kiwis and the Aussies loved the Green River knife so much that they ended up making their own copy of it. In 2001, Russell Harrington changed its name to Dexter Russell. And during the COVID pandemic, people flocked back to the outdoors and revisited hunting and natural food sources again. And this revitalized interest in the practical old Green River knife again. Today, Green River knives are still made, and they still resemble the same knives that were made almost 190 years ago. I first became interested in Green River knives many years ago. Basically, we were scavenging through the remains of an old collapsed 1800 shack on a friend's property in southeast Idaho, and I found these old knives right here when I was digging through that basically collapsed shack. And I was a really happy youngster when the property owner actually let me keep these. He thought that these knives were just a bunch of old junk, but something told me they were special, and I kept these in a box with some old baseball cards and such. Then later on, I found a book about these knives, and I just became immersed in the history and use of the Green River knives in particular. Before the Green River knife, this is exactly what most trade knives look like. Usually a simple butcher style knife. The English trade knives, like this old Wilson right here, usually only had a partial tang. See that? And here's another English trade knife. See, partial tang on it. This was looked upon as being a much weaker design than the Green River knives that had a full tang design. If you look at these, even though some Green River knives had basically the same exact shape and blade profile as a lot of the Sheffield knives, the Green River knives were considered much more durable. And even when the Green River knife transitioned into the Hunter and Skinner and small butcher knives that kind of won the West, you could see those were a complete full tang design right there that was considered extremely strong. So the people that are going to flood the comment sections of this video asking, how old is my knife, Desert Dog? How old is my knife? I need to know. I'm just going to warn you that it's extremely hard to date Green River knives. Anything made with real stamped markings from the J. Russell Cutlery Company was made before 1890. In 1890, they started acid etching the logo into the knives. And then, of course, as we went well into the 20th century, eventually, they started laser etching the maker's mark into the knives. So you had old stamped, acid etched, and laser etched. And another thing about these Green River knives is that these are one of the few knives that were actually liked by their owners so much that they usually used them until there was almost nothing left to sharpen anymore. So even though these were the exact same knives at one time, they don't have anywhere near the same shape because this one had been sharpened so repeatedly over the years. And I've seen skinning knives and hunting knives that are just basically a 1/4 inch sliver of steel, and the owners of those knives were still sharpening them and using them. So sometimes it's even hard to determine what kind of knife you have based off of shape because it's been utilized and sharpened so much over the years. The really old original Green River knives made between, say, 1837 and 1860 or so all had 5 pins holding the handle scales on. That was kind of their thing. But eventually, some of their knives, especially the ones that they weren't sending out west that were maybe not going to be used as hard, came with just 3 pins. So there was a lot of years where you'll see the 5 pins and the 3-pin designs intermixed together. So you can't really date by pins. But what we do know is virtually every Green River knife made in the 20th century came with rivets instead of pins. That's what they started doing. And even some of the rivets were smaller rivets, and some of them were the larger rivets like that. So you can't, other than if it has rivets, it's not a really old knife. It was made in the 20th century. I mean, that's easy to tell, but other than that, you can't really go by 5-pin versus 3-pin to date these knives. Like I said, it's a very hard knife to date. And if you want to get really confused with trying to date these knives and you want to go by handles or pins or rivets, well, that gets difficult too, because on a lot of these knives, their owners have changed the handles out throughout the years. And you can see here, it was very popular to cut a broom handle or a shovel handle or something like that in half and make knife scales for it for Green River knives. That was always very popular. But this one right here, it looks like somebody took some furniture grade wood and made their own handles out of that. So that's another aspect of this. When you try to look for, oh, this handle is period correct or that one is, you really can't tell because a lot of them, the owners have long since changed out the original handles. And by 1860, J. Russell just seemed to be making cutlery for everything. And this is one of the oddities in my collection right here. And this is actually called a one-arm man knife. Some even called it a one-hand man, but I believe in the catalog it was called the one-arm man knife. And this knife was specifically made for Civil War amputees so they can eat with one hand. They can chop their food and eat with one hand. So that's a real oddity in my collection here. The J. Russell Green River Works one arm man knife. In the 1880s, Green River knives were offered with scored handles made with really fancy ebony wood. And these knives really appealed to hunters. And what I noticed about these old knives with the scored handles and the ebony made out of ebony wood is that if you look at the spine, they're actually thicker than your average hunter. Another thing about the date of these knives is that knives made before about 1940 had tapered tangs on them. You go all the way back to the original knives made in the 1830s up to about 1940, you'll find that all the Green River knives had tapered tangs. And, this tapered tang design actually helped with the balance and the feel of the blade. And after 1940, they stopped tapering the tangs on their knives to eliminate a production step and make manufacturing cheaper. Now I know many of you are going to ask, what's up with this curious decal that they put on a lot of the old style Green River knives, even the ones they sell today? This is another enigma of the Green River knives. We don't really know when this sticker first started. I mean, it could have been back in the 1840s where they glued this to it so people would know that they were getting a genuine Green River knife. I don't know, but the earliest I could find actual evidence of this decal being on the knives is the J. Russell and Company 1884 catalog, where you could see they have a beach-handled skinning knife that has an illustration of the decal on the handle. So this dates back to at least 1884. Like I stated in the history portion of this video, many companies tried to capitalize on the popularity of Green River knives by copying them. And, this is the Green River Dadley knife. And this is a Sheffield copy of a Dadley knife. Almost exactly the same. This Sheffield knife is a copy of the Dadley knife, which was originally a copy of a Sheffield knife. So it's amazing how things go full circle, and nothing is really new in the knife world, is it? And as you can see, this vintage old hickory knife is probably a direct copy of the Green River butcher knife. I mean, it's obvious that's what they did. And these old hickory knives came out in the Depression era and were cheaper than Green River knives, which really hurt Russell and might have led to their merger with Harrington eventually. These knives are really addicting to collect, and they're pretty damn cheap to collect. So the next time you're in an antique store or you attend an estate sale and you see one of these beauties, don't hesitate to buy it and start your own collection. Back in the 1840s, most Green River knives shipped out west were actually blank, unsharpened knives. They were made so anyone can easily pin whatever handles they wanted on them, and so frontiersmen can sharpen them however they wanted. A lot of buffalo skinners like to only grind down the bevel on one side, so there was different preferences for how you wanted to make the edge on your knife. And that tradition kind of continues today with a large following of knife owners out there. You could still buy Green River knife blanks and customize your own knife. And I've done this many times over the last 30 years. And just for you, I'll go ahead and do another one for this video. So I went with G10 scales and I contoured them perfectly to my personal grip. And I'm glad I went with these orange liners because they add a lot of contrast and make this G10 really pop. And of course, I enlarged the holes, the tang holes in this knife, and added two mosaic pins and a lanyard hold. But the G10 pattern on this knife is just crazy. It's almost hypnotic if you stare at it long enough. And this is just a well balanced knife in the hand. And this is definitely a really cool Green River knife. But for those of you out there who like traditional scales better, traditional wood scales. Here's a Green River butcher or scalper knife with ironwood handles and blue liners on it. And it has that really great traditional look to it while exhibiting, a more modern attitude. And this is another beautiful knife right here. So, what did this knife cost me? Well, the knife blank was $17 at Jant's. The G10 scales were $15. The mosaic pins were $13. So that's $45 in materials that I spent on this knife. If you don't want to add custom scales, you can also simply shape and oil the factory handles to your liking and have a customized Green River knife without installing new handles. But the customization possibilities with Green River knives are just limitless, which is one of the main reasons that they're so popular. And as you could see, even in blank form, the allure of this knife hasn't changed much in 190 years. The ability to easily customize a Green River knife to your needs will undoubtedly maintain its popularity well into the future. Green River knives are more than just a part of American history. They became an instant cultural icon and are legendary to this day. Even as people build their $500 super steel bushcraft knives, there's still those of us who appreciate a cheap, rugged knife that's easy to sharpen in the field, easy to put your own handles on, and slices and skins better than most modern knives do. They come from a time when an axe was an axe and a knife was a knife. Their designs inspired famous woodsmen like Nessmuk, Kephart, and Whalen. Green River knives are just as relevant today as they were in the 1830s. Well, I hope you enjoyed my video on Green River knives. Thank you for watching, and as always, good hunting.